In this video, we're going to be discussing database constraints. And constraints really are just something that restrains something, or basically it's a rule is the best way to think of it. And the database has a number of different constraints, stuff like not, null, unique. I'll go through each one of these, but if you go ahead and go to your SQL Pro and go to Users and click on the Structure tab, here's where you're going to see the majority of those constraints. And the first constraint is not null, and it's this checkbox over here. We really haven't discussed this section over here, but if you want to go ahead and make a field required, like right now all of these fields are optional except for the user ID. Because that's the primary key, it has to be required. But all of these fields are currently optional. If you wanted to make, say, first name or last name unique, you would go ahead and just uncheck that, and now last name is a required field. The other one kind of talked about but didn't go into was unique. Username is unique, and the reason I know that is over here it says UNI. Also, it shows down here in indexes, which we're going to go deeper into in another video, but what we'll see in here is there's an index on username, and instead of saying unique, they said non-unique. They switched it. So if you notice a 0 is for the primary key, that means the primary key is unique. Those values cannot repeat. And then you see here, it says column name was user ID, and then over here, the username index on the user ID is also unique. Or you could just look for the UNI over here. Another constraint we have is a default constraint. And what a default constraint is exactly what it sounds like. It's the default. If you don't insert it, we'll go ahead and insert a value for you. And best way to example of this is like user status ID and user type ID. Well, if we look at those two tables, when I create a new user, I wouldn't create them as deleted. I'd probably want them to be active. So let's set the default for user status ID to 1. And you do want to do this. It will affect later on, later videos. Go to users, find the user status column, go to the default column here, and make that a 1. Now, if we don't include user status ID on an insert, it will default it to that value of 1. And we'll do the same thing for user type. Wouldn't make sense if everyone who registered through the website was a super user. Let's go ahead and just make them a client. So we'll make that a 1 as well. So click on users, go to structure, double click here, and say 1. And now that user type ID will always be a 1. A couple of other constraints is a check constraint. Unfortunately, there's a bug in our version of SQL. Hopefully they'll fix it soon. But check constraints are not enforced. And what a check constraint is, it would be like making sure, I don't know, maybe we're Budweiser. I may put a check constraint in here that says the date of birth. I do a computation to make sure it's over 21, or maybe I'm AARP, and I'd put something in there to say you have to be over 65. Check constraint may also be something like the username needs to be at least 6 characters. So you can put more complex commands in there as far as putting constraints on a column. Let's see what else is in here. Probably that's usually what it's used for. Maybe gender, I only accept M or F, or something like that. The other two constraints are also keys, and we've talked about them in length. Primary key and foreign key. Again, the primary key is every table has to have a primary key, and that primary key is represented by PRI up here. And really that table is that column, that field here, is just the unique identifier for that data, meaning this has to be unique. Then a foreign key is what we talked about, that links tables together. If you go ahead and look at the users table, if columns are linked through foreign keys, they usually get a little arrow there so we can click on it and follow it. There is but one exception to a foreign key constraint, and that is the null situation. What I mean is, if I put a value in here in occupation ID, I said it has to exist in the occupation table, occupation ID. Let's clear that filter out. So it has to be here. The only case where the only exception to that case, is the best way to put it, is nulls. Nulls are permitted. Okay, here's an example of a check constraint. And I'm not actually going to create this because this won't work in SQL. We'll create the table, but it doesn't enforce it. And again, this is a bug. But you'll see something in here. We have a check constraint where the age has to be greater than 21. if I was creating a persons table in here. So again, this is not something you're going to be quizzed on. It is something good to know because it is available in other versions of the database. It's just a bug in this current one. And then, of course, the no exception, which I just went over for the foreign keys. I do want to go ahead and show you some syntax, though. If I go over to query here, I created these, or I have the syntax here for these two alter table statements. I don't go into alter table too much, but alter table is what this app, SQL Pro, will issue to the database when it wants to change something structurally, meaning add a table or add a foreign key. And the syntax here you'll see is alter table, and I'm giving it a table name of activity log. We're going to add a foreign key for the order ID, and it references orders.order ID. The reason why I'm showing you the syntax is whatever is over here, orders.order ID, to the right of references, this has to be a primary key. Otherwise, it won't create. So if I look at the activity log table and I look at, well, order ID, I'll see order ID is an integer of 11 and it's unsigned. Well, if I'm creating a relationship between that one and orders.order ID, I'll go to orders, and here's order ID. A couple things when you create a relationship. It has to be the same type, so one can't be an int 11 and the other one be an int of 25. Two different types, it won't work. One can't be a varchar and one can't be an int. They have to be the same type, even down to the fact that this here, unsigned, if it's unchecked here, it must be unchecked here. They have to be the exact same type. But since they are the same type, I should be able to run this statement. And now if I go to activity log and click on relations, there it is. So we're going from the activity log order ID column to the orders table order ID column. And here's an example of doing the same thing with the user ID. And now there's both of them. And really what this means, if I go to content, is when I put a value in order ID, it either has to be null or that order ID already has to exist in the orders table order ID.